have promised that I would do this, and I am rewatching Outlander from the beginning, so let's talk about it. As always, this will have spoilers for the books and the show, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. Now, as I rewatch the show, I plan on highlighting a few of my standout moments to compare the books to the show, things I think we might have missed, things I think are worth discussing, and I wanted to start off by talking about the use of Claire's monologues in the series. One of our very first impressions of Claire is when she is in Inverness, and we hear her internal monologues speaking directly to the viewer. Claire explains a lot of backstory about who she is, what the situation is, where in time we are, but one of the most important lines of dialogue is when she says that even now, after all this time and all the death and pain, that heartbreak that followed, I would still make the same choice. And that is major foreshadowing for later on in the series, specifically season 8, when she makes a similar sort of admission to Jamie. But this line comes after she is discussing never owning a vase before and never living in a place long enough to justify such a purchase. Now, in the books, she actually does buy the vase. She buys a few vases, actually, and reflects on the fact that her and Frank's marriage has always been very nomadic. They've never settled in one place for very long, but they are about to actually have their own home as he is about to start working at Oxford. They've been married nearly 8 years at this point, and Claire mulls over whether or not to make the purchase, and she stares at the vase in the window, similarly to how she does in the show, and then decides at the last minute to go in and pick them up as sort of a confirmation that their marriage is about to be different. This is in direct contrast to the show version of events, where Claire wonders if her life would have changed if she did buy the vase and make a home for it. Like, would that have changed the course of history? Would she have been happy? She doesn't know the answer to that question, but that's when she says, even now, after all of the pain and heartbreak that followed, I would still make the same choice, aka not buying the vase. Now, I personally have often wondered where in the timeline or the greater story is Claire telling this monologue from. It's clearly her looking back on events of her life and this specific moment in time, as if she's rewatching her life like it's a movie or its own TV show. But I've always wondered where she's speaking from. Is this at the end of the story? Is this after the events of only season 1, when she goes back to her own time in season 2? I've always wanted to know where she's retelling it from. And even later on in the series, when the narration is not as present, it is often used in a way that you can tell that it is being told in past tense and not present tense, which differs from the books. I know that some people have wondered if maybe she's retelling this story to a grandchild at some point, but I really don't think she'd reveal so much about herself or Jamie if that were the case. But in writing, when stories are told in the first person perspective, it's more so to grant the viewer to the main character's thoughts and the way that they're thinking and interpreting things. So I don't think that this is being used as a device to indicate that Claire is speaking to anyone directly. But I've also wondered if this might be her retelling her own story to herself by means of a journal or writing it down to become a book. But that is by nature of the two mediums. In the books, she's just thinking, and in the show, they set it up as though she's telling the story. Of course, as the book series expanded and we got more and more books, the point of view that we are in has stretched out to include many characters, but their parts are told in third person. Claire is still very much the only person in the book version of events that is told in first person point of view. So how does this opening scene and introduction to Claire matter later on in the story? Well, this isn't the first and last time we will see reference to a vase or this vase specifically. In the episode Lallybroch later on, Jamie and Claire are meeting with some of the tenants at Lallybroch, and one of them gifts Claire a vase, blue and white vase with some fresh flowers in it. This doesn't happen in the books, but in the show it's being used as a way to kind of initiate this feeling of home to Claire, because it's playing on this concept she brings up in the first episode of never having a home or justifying having something as nice as this to place in her home decoratively. We know that Lallybroch, and this episode in particular, is really sentimental for Claire and Jamie because it does give them a window into what their stable, secure life would have looked like had they just stayed there, which also breaks your heart because of the foreshadowing, and again harkens back to Claire's monologue saying that she wouldn't have changed anything, even though she would have liked to have the stability that the vase signifies. Now, if you look closely at the vase in this shot here, where Claire is looking at this specific piece, it shows up again in season 5 in the finale, episode 12, titled Never My Love. There are lots of Easter eggs in this episode in particular from Claire's past that are almost kind of a blink and you'll miss it situation, but the vase does make a return in this episode, so it holds a lot of significance in Claire's memories and her mind. In episode 6 of season 6, Claire and Jamie are arguing in the stables, and the sentiment of her words harkens back to the ones she says in episode 1 as well, where she tells Jamie that she's not prepared to admit that their life was a lie and that she doesn't belong in that time because they're there out of her love for him, and she just is unwilling to accept that Jamie doesn't love her in the same way. And I really do think that the reason this conversation or argument holds as much weight as it does in season 6 is because we had such a strong foundation laid in these earlier episodes, or even in this particular episode 1, because it is a building block on which we can see Claire and Jamie's relationship and the strength of their relationship build and grow. And even though that monologue is not something plucked directly from the source text, it does allow the show to call back on it in later seasons, and these callbacks and parallels can present themselves in new and exciting ways because they took the time to create such a rich dialogue and use this monologue situation that we get from Claire and at times Jamie to their advantage. As a book reader and a show watcher, I find it really satisfying when conversations or comments or memories can come full circle in this way, and it was fun watching episode 1 again and picking up on some of those small ones, but I liked this one in particular, and the significance of the vase is still something that we see all the way up until season 6, and I have a feeling we'll get something similar to that in the last season of the show. There's going to be a lot of circling back to previous moments in the series to kind of tie things up in a neat little bow, and I really appreciate them connecting the dots in those ways.